After the tone, please state your name.
Hi, this is Mimi Lufkin, the Chief Executive Officer of the National Alliance for Partnerships in Equity Education Foundation. And this is a webinar today on an orientation for pilot sites for the STEM Equity Pipeline Project. The STEM Equity Pipeline Project is a grant, National Science Foundation grant that the NAEP Education Foundation received, specifically targeted towards working with state and local education agencies and staff who conduct professional development at those levels on building their capacity to increase their ability to have more women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics-related career clusters programs of study. As part of the implementation of the STEM Equity Pipeline Project, we have been focusing our efforts on working with pilot sites in some of the states. And so this is a brief orientation for those sites around what the expectations are for their participation, a little bit about the training that will be conducted with them, and hopefully answer those of you who are listening to this webinar some questions you may have about participating as a pilot site. Let me first of all tell you a little bit about the goals of the project overall, and then you can sort of see how the pilot site process fits into these goals. There are three goals for the STEM Equity Pipeline Project. The first one is to build the capacity of the formal education community. Really, we're focused on working with individuals who conduct professional development and to integrate gender equity into STEM education professional development in the states in which we're working. So we're really emphasizing looking at STEM programs at the secondary and post-secondary level. Post-secondary is primarily community colleges, and the transition of students from secondary to post-secondary programs in STEM. Second goal is to institutionalize the implemented strategies by connecting the outcomes to existing accountability systems. And in our particular field, we're particularly interested in looking at the work that we do and how it relates to assisting local educational agencies to improve their performance on the Perkins, that's the Federal Career and Technical Education legislation, better known as Perkins. The Perkins Act accountability measures for non-traditional training and employment. When I use the term non-traditional in this case, these are fields or occupations where one gender is underrepresented by less than 25%. And most STEM careers are considered non-traditional for women. So the work that we do with the pilot sites in particular is focused specifically on improving performance on those indicators, as well as looking at other accountability measures that may be of interest to the LEAs. And I use the acronym LEA for Local Educational Agency. And lastly, another goal is to broaden the commitment to gender equity in STEM education overall through the work that we do. Just to be clear about what we mean by STEM, because it's a term that's often thrown around out there and used to mean different things to different people, but in this particular project, we define STEM as these areas. You may or may not be familiar with the U.S. Department of Education's work that they've done on the 16 career clusters, and it's an organizing framework for looking at both programs, offerings in career and technical education and other areas, and also workforce development programs in employment preparation. And of the 16 clusters, there are 7 that we have identified that we consider to be part of our STEM definition: science, technology, engineering, math, the acronym. And there is actually one cluster that has that title, but there are other clusters that include skills in math and science, technology and engineering in these other 6 clusters as well, so we've also included them. So when we work with the pilot sites, we're looking at programs that fit under one of these 7 cluster areas. So science, technology, engineering, and math, agriculture, food and natural resources, health science, information technology, manufacturing, transportation, distribution, and logistics, and architecture and construction. Quickly, so that you understand where the pilot sites fit in the model in which we're implementing, we basically have developed what we call an extension services group, which is the second layer in this particular design here. We have a national advisory board that provides advice and helps assist with resource dissemination, and also helps us identify extension service group members, people who have particular expertise in gender equity and STEM education. And this extension services group then provides technical assistance, consulting services, professional development to members of the state teams in the states in which we're working. Those state teams typically are people who conduct professional development or provide technical assistance to local educational agencies throughout their state, may be involved with programs or organizations statewide, including the departments of ed or chancellor's offices or regents, boards of regents, or or may be professional development organizations, associations, and even local educational agency representatives who conduct professional development in their particular agency. So the state teams tend to be fairly broad group. But the idea is that we're trying to pass the information that we have basically to translate the National Science Foundation's research on gender and science and engineering to practice by providing that information to people who do professional development in the states in which we're working, with the intention that they then would conduct additional professional development of their own with teachers, other counselors, school administrators, staff, and in local education agencies across the state to build sort of the capacity of their ability to implement research-based practices. The pilot site process evolved out of this work to develop a way in which we can work directly with local educational agencies to implement a particular program improvement process model that is sort of the core part of our training component. And so you'll notice the arrow that moves down on the left-hand side of the model. It's through the pilot site work that the Extension Services Group works directly with local educators, and that we also bring the state team into that process. The last area you can see down on the right-hand side of the model to assist in providing technical assistance and additional professional development with the local educational agencies that we work with through the pilot site. Now, we do lots of work with local educators through other avenues of the project outside the pilot site work. For example, we conduct a series of webinars all year long. We have a listserv that we maintain, can have a monthly newsletter that has lots of resources on it. Of course, there's our virtual learning community, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But the pilot site work is probably the most intensive work we do at the local level. Now, I mentioned briefly a minute ago about the fact that we implement a program improvement change model as a central core part of our training. And this is basically the emphasis of the piece, the cornerstone of the work that we do with the pilot sites. And so let me just give you a very quick review of it, because I'm going to encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about this, we do have a series of webinars about each one of these steps that's located on our website, and I'll take you there in just a minute so you can see where to locate them. The five-step program improvement process model was something that the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity developed a few years ago, well, 2002 now, so it's a few years, with the U.S. Department of Education in collaboration with some other organizations to really look at how to work at the local level and even at the state level in implementing a program improvement process focused primarily on looking at Perkins accountability performance. We have taken that same somewhat generic model and applied it here, specifically looking at gender equity in STEM. And so the steps that we go through are the same, but the content of those steps is very focused to the work that we're doing. So step one has to do with documenting performance results. Basically what we do is we work with the teams at the local level to identify data that can be analyzed by conducting a performance gap analysis. That data includes the Perkins data, which is basically enrollment in programs, non-traditional STEM programs, and completion of those programs. Now, there may be other data that we'd want to look at, such as participation in course sequences, in math course sequences or science course sequences in the school. We might also want to look at achievement on specific standardized tests or even GPA records as far as achievement types of scores or state assessments. And there may be other data elements that people in LEAs would want to look at as well. Excuse me. I apologize. I seem to have a little scratchy throat here this morning. Primary to the documenting performance results section, though, is really looking at the Perkins data. We do request that states submit data to us about their Perkins performance data for all local educational agencies, and we can help LEAs do a performance gap analysis and benchmark themselves against other LEAs in the state. After that is conducted, it's part of the training we do, and we do some prep work ahead of time. We then take a look at research-based root causes. What are the barriers? What does the research tell us about the barriers students face to entering non-traditional STEM-related programs? And what are the things that are causing leaks in the pipeline and holding students back from completing sequences of courses, or even making the decision to enter these fields as their career choice. And we have a series of assessment instruments that we design for each of the pilot sites, a way in which the team then can go back and conduct what we call sort of an action research process to identify or at least validate their theory and what they believe the root causes may be that are in play at their particular location. The third step is to then take a look at research-based best practices, models, solutions, and taking a close look at the results of your root cause research to identify which solutions might be the most appropriate ones to eliminate the barriers that you've identified for your students. And then we also focus quite a bit of effort on looking at developing evaluation plans to appropriately evaluate the implementation of the solutions that are selected. The thing about evaluation is that we often think about an activity or an event or even a longer-term implementation of something as it being successful based on the numbers of people who show up, how much fun they had, whether or not they liked the food they received, and don't really measure the longer-term or even shorter-term outcomes, such as changes in attitude, behavior, willingness to enroll in a program or consider something different than prior to participation in the event, all the way up to they're actually taking action and enrolling in a program, completing a program, eventually transitioning to further education, et cetera. So we develop evaluation plans for each of the pilot sites based on their strategy selection. And we also have then under step 5 is some tools to assist the teams in tracking their progress on the implementation of the process that they have or the solution that they have selected to help them stay on track. So those are basically the 5 steps of the program improvement process model that we use as the key component for our training. We asked the pilot sites to develop a team. We encourage that team to be at least 4 people per school participate in the training, and most likely, as the team implements its work, that particular group may grow. But it's important that the teams include decision makers and implementers, both. So everyone from administrators, institutional researchers, if you happen to be lucky enough to have someone who does that sort of work on your campus, or in a high school setting, this may be someone who's collecting much of the data that we're talking about. Coordinators of programs, if you have a special populations coordinator or someone who's even specifically looking at non-traditional recruitment. Certainly guidance counselors, as guidance counselors tend to be gatekeepers for program participation, so it's important to engage them in this process. And certainly the faculty who are teaching these STEM-related programs of study in those 7 areas that we discussed. Now, some pilot sites choose to focus on 1 or 2 programs, and in those instances, then it's important to have the faculty that are teaching those particular programs involved in the process from the beginning. One of the things that we encourage particularly also is that it's important that the team members all be people who are supportive and willing to participate in this teamwork, that it is something that they have a strong interest in, and that they understand the issue of engaging women and girls in STEM programs and the need for that in our particular economy and our workforce. I think the last thing you'd want to have on a team would be individuals who are not supportive of this concept or are coming to that process kicking and screaming. Better to bring people who are supportive to begin with and have some initial success, and that often can convince others to participate later on. The commitment and investment in implementing this project, one of the things that we attempt to do here is to try to make this as manageable as possible and to assist the teams in the implementation in a way in which sort of makes the process easier. I wanted to also mention that there is a handout that goes along with this particular part of the presentation that you can download that's available on our website. So when you came to watch this archived version of this webinar, you can download it right off of the same web page. There should be a link there. But basically the commitment needs to be, and I mentioned earlier about supporting gender equity in STEM, that's a really important component of all the team members. Basically there's 2 days of training, so consider the fact that the teams will need to gather for 2 full days. They're not held back-to-back. These are separated. I'll talk about that in a second. It usually takes somewhere between 3 and 5 days to conduct the root cause research. And when I say that, that can be spread out over a period of time and distributed amongst a variety of people, because the root cause research basically it could be, for example, conducting a survey, whereas we assist you in the development of the survey, but certainly, and can also set the survey up for you on SurveyMonkey so that the tabulation of the results is relatively simple. But getting the survey out, getting people to complete it, some of that sort of outreach activity that happens locally needs to be part of the team's responsibility. There may also be interest in the team in doing either focus group or possibly some interviews in order to engage students or even teachers on the campus to validate or help you identify some of the barriers that they may be facing, students in particular, for staying in some of these programs or accessing them in the first place. And as far as resources is concerned, depending on how the pilot site activity is implemented in your particular state, and this varies, we've had everywhere from states who have used some of their non-traditional set-aside funds from Perkins to provide mini-grants to LEAs to participate in the pilot site activity. We've had some states who have used other dollars to fund mini grants to the pilot sites. We've had other states who had the pilot sites integrate this work into their existing Perkins application for their local funding. And that is certainly one of the things that we encourage, since after all, this effort is particularly targeted towards helping LEAs improve their performance on their non-traditional indicator in Perkins, which is one of the required uses of funds for local Perkins dollars. There is a data submission requirement that actually we request from the state, which I mentioned earlier. We do get from the states their Perkins data disaggregated by site, by program, by gender, race, ethnicity, and special population status so that we can conduct a performance gap analysis. There are some instances where we haven't been able to obtain this data from states, or the data that we get from states is suppressed due to state privacy laws. And in those instances, then, this data may be required to be collected and submitted locally for just the pilot sites that we're working with. But there may also be other data that the locals would want to look at regarding doing a performance gap analysis to really be able to identify where there are places in the pipeline within the system where there appears to be leaks. And it may very well be as much as that you have a high enrollment and participation rate of girls in some of your STEM-related career and tech ed programs, but they're not transitioning into post-secondary education in those areas or employment in those areas. Or you may see that you have girls who are completing math and science course sequences or have the prerequisites for participating in some of your pre-engineering programs and or high technology programs, but aren't taking advantage of those programs on your campus and for some reason aren't seeing the connection. So the performance gap analysis can sort of bring out a lot of interesting things, and the data kind of opens the, as I call it, sort of opens the window slightly and begins to let you see what the picture is looking like. The root cause research really, I think, is the next part that makes the picture more whole for you. The training itself is conducted in two parts. We typically bring the pilot site groups together and do training on steps 1 and 2. So we look at data and performance gap analysis under the documenting performance results and develop some theories around what root causes may potentially be in play. So we do a whole training on what does the research tell us about the barriers that students face, and the teams can begin to develop hypotheses around what they think the root causes are that might be in play on their campus, and develop an action plan for going out to do their root cause research. The second part of the training typically occurs a few months later, depending on how long the teams need to conduct their root cause research, so that the teams then come back to report out about what they've discovered through their research. And then we talk about what are the research-based strategies that are effective in eliminating barriers that have been identified, and have the teams begin to develop action plans to implement a particular strategy. This is a training that we focus a lot on evaluation, how to develop appropriate evaluation plans for the strategy or strategies that you've selected to implement. And we give you an orientation around the tools that we have available for you to use in developing implementation planning, tracking tools to make sure you stay on track and are completing your implementation strategies in a timely way and most effectively. So again, the training is done typically in two parts with a few months in between to provide time for the teams to do their root cause research in between. Now, the on-site work, there's action that occurs at home, and we sort of put this into 3 pieces. So after you've completed the Part 1 training, we ask that you go back as your teams. If there may be some additional data analysis that you want to do after you've learned how to do this performance gap analysis at the training. In addition to looking at Perkins data, there may be other data sources. And, of course, conducting your root cause research. Coming back after that, after completing the second part of the training then is to actually implement the solution that you've selected and to evaluate what you've implemented. Now, solutions can be multi-layered and or short-term and longer-term solutions, everything from conducting a single event where you may, for example, have some, let's say, for example, like a Focus Your Future activity where you bring in parents and their daughters for an orientation to your pre-engineering program on your campus, and you have role models from the community who are women engineers who participate in that activity, and you do a pre- and post-assessment of the girls' interests in engineering, and you can certainly do the same evaluation of the parents. You know, would they have considered this career field for their daughter before versus afterwards, and then track the girls who participate in that particular event to see whether or not, if you did it, for example, in the spring, whether or not any of them actually enrolled in your program in the fall. And the intent of that, the thing to think about is that how do you develop a series of activities that continue to support that notion all the way along the line that may have been kicked off by a particular event? And so one of the things we also look at are more longer-term solutions that may involve things like a series of brown bag lunches that may be held for students or some sort of mentoring activities that occur over a longer period of time, as well as outreach to parents, continuing to inform and educate them either through a school newsletter or community activities. Anyway, there are lots of various solution options that are out there, and we work with the teams to develop something that works best for them based on certainly on time and resources and effort that's available. After the initial solutions are completed, then we bring the pilot site groups back together for them to showcase the results. And this can happen in a variety of settings. It could be, for example, at a statewide conference where they might have an opportunity to present as a group in a workshop setting, or we could even do it virtually where each of the pilot sites can present in a webinar setting, much like this we're doing here, and have those archived and available for others to view. But either way, in an effort to try to pass on the knowledge that's learned, we do some kind of a showcasing activity with the pilot sites. Now, one of the things to think about is what's the timeline for this a little bit. And this can be everywhere from, this could occur, for example, in a single year where the Part 1 training is done in the fall, a Part 2 training might be done in early winter, and a shorter-term solution might be implemented in the spring and the showcase done during a summer conference. Or it could be a 2-year cycle where, depending on the pilot site's timing and what resources and the type of solution they choose, if their solution is much more complicated, or maybe it's a professional development activity that goes on with teachers in terms of implementing equitable instructional practices that requires a longer period of time for implementation and evaluation, then it will take longer. But basically, we try to conduct the training component in the first 4 to 5 months of the process, with implementation happening, of course, after that. And the implementation may be a rotating thing that occurs for many years. And the thing about the 5-step program improvement process, it's really a cyclical process. So when you complete the evaluation of your event, you're basically conducting a performance gap analysis to determine what's the next strategy you should implement, or how might you tweak your existing strategy to be more effective. That's all part of this process. Now, one of the things that we always ask anyone who participates in any of our work, and certainly the pilot sites, is that we want them to share what they have learned with others. This is an extension services grant from the National Science Foundation, and inherent in the word extension service is that we want to extend our knowledge to you, and the pilot sites to extend their knowledge to others. And this can happen in a variety of ways, whether it's one-on-one sharing with peers and colleagues on their own campus or other campuses or within their professional networks, or something more formal that might be a presentation at a local in-service training. It could be a presentation at a workshop, a regional workshop, or even a presentation at a state or a national conference. Maybe you would be willing to write an article for a newsletter or blog on in some sort of an online outreach activity, or write an article for a magazine like Techniques or any of the STEM magazines that are out there. But we really like to ask, and that's why we do this showcase with the pilot sites, because it's a mechanism for the pilot sites to be able to share what they're learning with others. One of the things we ask all the participants in the pilot site work to do is to quarterly, while they're participating in this effort, to let us know about how they might have extended their knowledge to others. And it's a very simple 3-question survey that is sent via email that we ask anyone who's participating to complete. And so that's just information for you to know. If you participate in a pilot site, you will receive from us on a quarterly basis a request to complete an extension agent report to let us know about how you shared this knowledge with other people. And lastly, in addition to the training that we conduct and the technical assistance that is provided to you via the state team and also your state facilitator, there's lots of professional development opportunities and other experts that are accessible via our virtual learning community. Everything from a listserv to communicate with others. We often set up SharePoint sites for the pilot sites so that they have a location where they can share what they're learning in an online environment. And, of course, there's the webinars. And on our website, there's lots of resources on the 5-step program improvement process, training materials, et cetera. I'm going to take a second here and share with you the STEM Equity Pipeline website so you can see it. You can access this site at stemequitypipeline.org. You'll notice that our homepage has all the upcoming events and past events. We just did a webinar yesterday afternoon, which will now be a past event with Lisa Elliott around brain development, early brain development, and its impact on education of males and females. And it's archived. You can go take a look at it, as are many other webinars that we've conducted. If you look under the professional development menu, you'll see there's lots of options there, but one of them is the STEM Equity Pipeline archive webinars. I also want to make sure that you know under the resources menu, you'll see here that there are lots of materials on this page around the 5-step program improvement process. There's a guidebook, a manual, some of the exercises we use in the training, so if you want to take a look at those, you can as well. And also, there's lots of online resources. Each one of these sections has lots of resources on it as well. And when you go to take a look at the archive webinars, you see there's a long string of webinar options that are available to you there. And I'm going to quickly take you to do this a little differently. Take you to the archive webinars page further down the screen, and you'll see there is an archive webinar on an overview of the 5-step improvement process. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go right to the website, and this is an hour webinar that gives you an overview of the process. We also have webinars on each of the steps. So, for example, this is on step 1, this one's on step 2, and so forth. And you'll notice that there are other webinars sprinkled in between. These are all loaded here based on when they were actually conducted. But there are 5 webinars in the string. This is the step 3 one that you can get to see all of those. And those are 1 hour on each of the steps, so they're a little bit more detailed. All right, I'm going to go back now to the PowerPoint and finish this up with you. So I encourage you to take a look at the website. There are lots of really good resources there. Well, to close, again, I encourage you, if you're interested in participating as a pilot site, that you contact your state contact for the project. Back on the website, if you go to the state teams menu, it'll identify the states that are currently participating in the project and identify who the state contacts are. I'll go back there so you can see. For example, these are the states that are currently participating: California, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, New Hampshire, Ohio, Oklahoma, and Wisconsin. If you click on any one of these pages, I'll just click on California. In California, we have 2 state contacts. One is at secondary level and one at the post-secondary level. You can contact them about your interest in participating as a pilot site. And the same information is on the pages there for each of the states that are participating. If you're from a non-participating states, we aren't currently doing pilot site work in non-participating states, but certainly our organization is available to contract for consulting services, to provide training and technical assistance for LEAs who are interested in doing pilot site work, or even statewide activity focused on the 5-step program improvement process. And so if that's your interest, you can just contact our offices at the National Alliance for Partnerships in Equity Education Foundation. Well, that's it for today, and I hope that this webinar provides you with some good information about how to be involved as a pilot site. If you have any additional questions, you can email me or any of our staff, and I'll take us back to the PowerPoint so that get my contact information. And I can be contacted via email or telephone at the information that you can see up on your screen. And thank you very much for participating.